would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Larry. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Before we get started, I'm wondering if you can just share with everybody where in the world you are at the moment.
Sure. I'm in Arlington, Texas.
Mhm.
The indigenous people here were the Caddo. We also had Comanche and several other Plains tribes. I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth
Mhm.
area of Texas.
Okay.
And I didn't grow up here, but I've been here my entire adult life. Yeah.
Okay, so I love to start these episodes with a very broad, vague question, which is, where does your story start?
Yeah, sure. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's a coal town, kind of um, blue collar, but lots of trees, lots of hills, lots of water, lots of sports, lots of civic activities, lots of ethnicity. It's just a great place to grow up.
Mm.
And I was raised Catholic. I had a lot of guilt, I had a lot of pressure to perform. I was the oldest child, and
Mm.
everybody thought I was, supposed to kind of lead the way. It was a lot of responsibility for, a 12-year-old kid.
Mm.
Um, and I stayed in Catholicism for about 50 years, and really, I did do very well. I kind of got guilted into success. I was an investment banker. I was a very transactional guy. I only got paid if I closed, so I figured out how to close. Um, I wasn't any fun at a party because I was always looking for the next deal.
Yeah.
I didn't get to go to many parties because I was traveling all the time. I mean, I just worked like a slave.
Mm.
Um, but I was providing for my family and I had some financial security and I was successful by whatever measure you want.
Mm.
And 2001, when the planes hit the towers, I just thought, oh my gosh, what was that? What kind of religion does that?
Yeah.
And I started to explore Islam, not because I was spiritually interested, just because I was politically interested. And
Mm.
it took about 5 minutes to figure out, well, that wasn't Islam. That was not
Yeah.
Muhammad. That's not in the Quran.
Yeah.
That's a fundamentalist kind of thing. And every religion has fundamentalists.
Mm.
Um, and I was really taken with Islam. I discovered some of the mysticism of Islam, the people in Islam that went looking for a direct interaction with the ultimate reality. And I thought, well, why don't we have any Christian mystics? And we do, but we don't hear about them. And we really do in the Catholic Church. It's not something Protestantism has ever been comfortable with.
Yeah.
And in Christianity, it's like, hey, if you want to have if you want to be exposed to God, just come to church. We'll do that for you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really work that way anyplace else.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, it's funny. I guess I don't even understand. I go to mass every week.
Mm.
I'm as Catholic as you can be, and I really don't know that much about it. So I start to explore. And when I say I start to explore, I don't just read the book, I read the whole bookshelf. And
Yeah.
so, I just get taken down all these trails of philosophy and theology and history and science and psychology, and it just all kind of and every time there was a hole, I was trying to sort of map the terrain. And anytime there was a gap, I thought, well, I need to know something about that. So, and a couple things hit me right away. I'll make this really quick. Um, First of all, I realized that, particularly in the United States, I think many people have a literal understanding of Christianity and they think the Bible is history.
Mm.
And if you point out to them, well, if you look at other religions, a lot of this, what you think is history is called mythology in other religions. And they take it, as a symbol of something. And the symbols are very rich. I don't mean to be disrespectful of Christianity. I'm just saying I don't think it's literal. So I
Mm.
started to have really concerns about talking snakes and global floods and virgin births and physical resurrections. And I realized that they were, like I say, powerful symbols that are universal almost. And then I realized, well, a lot of the fundamental, very, very fundamental things in Christianity, like original sin and the
Mm.
Trinity and substitutionary atonement, they're theories.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't mean they're not true. They might be accurate representations of reality or not. And
Mm.
what I discovered, the long and short of it, is not, oh, I discovered all these things are false. I just discovered all these things are much squishier than I thought that they were. And at the end of the day, I was going to have to be convinced that there is a God, that God is personal, that God is three persons. And
Mm.
then I looked at what had happened to Christianity in terms of treatment of minorities, treatment of women, treatment of LGBTQ. And I just thought, this thing has gone way, way off the rails.
Mm.
So I really held everything up to the light. There really were no sacred cows. There was nothing that I wasn't willing to explore. And I really thought when I started, hey, there's 2 billion believers. It's been around for 2,000 years. There's a book for crying out loud. What could go wrong? And it turns out quite a lot can go wrong.
Yeah.
So I had a period that was kind of dark. I was angry. A lot of people go through anger, when they're going through deconstruction, and you're angry at things like, well, my gosh, I was told this was a fact.
Mm.
Nobody said it was an opinion. Nobody said it was a theory. Nobody told me that there's a bunch of Christians that believe something totally different. That's another thing. I've
Mm.
I've started talking about Christianities because there are many different interpretations of Christianity.
Mhm.
And then you get angry that people question you and they say, "Oh, well, no, no, you just want to sin. You just falling off the wagon. You're just looking for attention. You were never a believer after all." No, none of that is true. It's not true of me. It's not true of most of the people I know are deconstructing.
Yeah.
Most of the people that deconstruct take it much more seriously than many of the people that don't. And I was like that.
Yeah.
And then you also get angry. I got angry at people who marginalized me because I thought differently than they did.
Mm.
And so I'm very tolerant at this point of other people's opinions. I've been marginalized. I'm
Mm.
not going to marginalize anybody else. And so that's probably a good place to stop if you have questions about sort of the first half. And I would say I wrote a book called The Way.
Mm.
Um, that's it behind me. Meaningful spirituality for a modern world. And the first half is that deconstruction. It's taking it apart, like I just described. And I wish that I could have just got right to the second half and said, well, I just started out the book. Well, I used to believe all things Christians believe. I don't believe that anymore. Here's what I've discovered. But
Mm.
you can't write a book like that in this culture because people say, well, I thought this was about God. And where's Jesus? And is this biblical? So the first half of the book is really just to kind of shake people loose a little bit and say, hey, all these things you don't really know. And all these things you believe very strongly, you don't really have such good reasons for believing them. And
Mm.
I'm not telling you what to believe or what not to believe. And there's people that read the book and say, I'm a better Christian after I read the book. And I'm glad about that.
Yeah.
But there's other people who read the book and say, wow, those are some good questions.
Mm.
I had those questions. I'm glad you took the time to do the digging that I didn't have the time to do or the interest to do.
Mm.
And I even had some people say, man, I don't know how to say this, but this is a Jewish man and a real good friend. And I said, go ahead and say it. He said, I just didn't realize that Christians believe so many unbelievable things. I
Yeah.
said, no, believe it.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, I had to write the first half of the book in order to get to the second half of the book. And in the second half of the book, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say, this is what you're supposed to believe. It just says, hey, look, I read 1,000 books.
Mm,
Um, I baked in a sweat lodge. I chanted to Shiva. I whirled with the dervishes. I meditated in a zendo. Um, you're not going to do all those. You're probably not going to do all those things. You don't have to. But if you want to know what you learn after you do all those things, it's in the book. And the
mm,
book is really just reporting. I don't have any credential. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a pastor. I'm not somebody that spent my life in the practice of religion. I was a 1 hour a week Christian for 50 years. So I was concerned that the book may not be taken seriously, but it really has been. And I've been really gratified by that.
mm,
Um, but it is just one guy's reporting
mm.
on what you find when you like dig to the roots on some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the Catholic faith that you were raised with, how embedded was that faith in like your sense of self and your psyche?
That's a great question. I would tell you, and I think a lot of other Catholics would tell you that being Catholic is a little bit like being Italian. That, if I say I'm not Catholic anymore,
Mm.
how can you not be?
Like a
It was
cultural
very
thing?
deep.
Mm.
It was very deep. And there was a superiority to it that's really alarming now that, well, a Catholic might say, well, we were the original religion, you know. Um, the Protestants, everybody, all the 45,000 other denominations made stuff up.
Mm.
Well, guess what? You made stuff up too, and that's kind of what I learned on the journey that hey, the nobody is original, nobody is authentic, nobody the one exercise in the book that gets people's attention, I say, take out a piece of paper, write down everything you know about God.
Mm.
But if you know it because you read it in a book, that's really not the knowledge I'm talking about, because then we'd have to talk about the book.
Yeah.
And if you know it because someone told you, that's not what I'm talking about either, because then we'd have to talk about who told you and how they knew. And
Mm.
really, don't even tell me you had an experience, because guess what? I'm going to, and I do this with people, and I do it with the utmost respect. Somebody says, I had a profound experience. God spoke to me.
Mm.
And I say, well, that is profound. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm glad for you and I respect your experience.
Mm.
I'm just asking because I'm a reporter. Do you know that God spoke to you, or could you have been talking to yourself?
Yeah.
And I say that with the utmost respect. And half the people say, oh, yeah, there's no question I was talking to myself.
Mm.
Really? And the other half of the people say, oh, darn, that's a good question. I don't really know how to answer that.
Mm.
I mean, so the exercise of sitting in front of a blank piece of paper trying to figure out what you absolutely know about God is
Mm.
a humbling one and a troubling one to people who thought that they knew a lot.
Yeah. I'm
Um,
curious, prior to 2001, when you sort of very heavily started deconstructing, who was God to you then?
I bought the whole story. Um, I thought that God was a person. I thought that I thought that Jesus was, because I had done a little reading. I thought that Jesus was something less than, the absolute beyond space and time God. But I certainly thought he was very special. And if somebody says, well, virgin births and physical resurrections, I might have said, well, it's God. God can do anything, you know. And I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's a medical doctor, and he's still a fundamental Christian. And he was
Mm.
in my wedding, and I've known him forever. And he was visiting me in Colorado, and he said, "Tell me about your book." And I started to tell him, and he said, He said, I think that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and the dinosaurs died in the Great Flood, and everybody but Noah and his family perished." And I said, "Wow, really?" Um, and this is sort of how I approach it. I said, "Well, we're in a mountain valley. We're at 8,000 feet above sea level. Did the water get to 8,000 feet? And where did all that water come from? And where did it all go? And did all of the kangaroos doggy paddle from Australia to the Middle East, take a boat ride, and then doggy paddle back? And why
Mm.
don't we find human bones and dinosaur bones in the same place? But then here's the important thing, and this is getting back to I, I don't I don't blister anybody about their beliefs. I said, you know what? I said I wasn't here 6,000 years ago. I
Mm.
wasn't here 13 billion years ago. You might be right.
Mm.
And he said, well, thanks. And then I leaned in and I know him very well. And I said, it's your turn. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, just tell me I might be right. You
Mm.
weren't here 6,000 years ago either. And he says, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I know you couldn't. And I'm not angry or upset or anything. But if you're me and you know me like you do, you know, I think it's pretty arrogant that you're not able to give me the same grace that I gave you.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I know I feel badly about that, but
Mm.
it has to be that way. So we went up on the mountain and it was a magical place and you could touch the rock wall and it would go up 3,000 feet and it would go down 3,000 feet. And you'd look across the valley 50 miles to the north, 50 miles to the west, 50 miles to the south. And blue sky, you know, not a cloud. And he had an experience where he just thought, man, this is just stupid. This is just so wonderful here. And I'm just seeing one little glimpse of this massive universe.
Yeah.
So we came back down and we're smoking cigars and looking at the mountain. He said, you know that conversation we had the other day? I said, yeah. He goes, you might be right. Now,
We
yeah,
love
it was a
it.
beautiful moment because nobody nobody had to crow about it. Nobody had to grovel about it. Just said, you know, you're over here and I'm over here, and
Yeah.
you might be right. It was a, and so that's my goal. And you know, in the United States today, that'll get you a long way in a lot of the political discussions because you know there's a lot of division. There's a lot of people that believe a lot of unbelievable things,
Mm.
and so the ability to ask questions and look for a middle ground and ultimately say you might be right is has been really helpful.
Mm.
It's avoided a lot of discomfort, you know,
Yeah.
politically and spiritually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I find, we love when a fundamentalist embraces some nuance, right? Like nuance is where we can actually learn and grow and create something new in itself. Um, I'm curious what it was like for you as you did start deconstructing and started. I sort of use the term pulling on a thread in that, like, once you start, you can try and chop it off and go back to normal, or you can just keep pulling and pulling and pulling, and everything starts to unravel. But I'm curious what that was
yeah,
like for you and whether there was any fear and anxiety and exploring and potentially even dismantling everything that you had known to be true up until that point.
of course. Yeah, it was very distressing, and it's a little bit like you know, when my daughter, who's an adult now, but you
Mhm.
know, when she was very young, she figured out that maybe there wasn't a Santa Claus. So she asked, "Is there a Santa Claus?" And I said, "No, there's not a Santa Claus." And she
Yeah.
went away, and 5 minutes later, she came back and said, "How about the Easter Bunny?" And we said, "No, there's no Easter Bunny." The Tooth Fairy, you know, it just kept going on, and all these things that we had told her, um, and that she believed, she all of a sudden discovered, well, if this isn't true, that's not true. That's probably not true either. And it was exactly like that. You know, it's just like you know, and I really did I really was adrift.
Mm.
Now, I had a friend who helped me at that point, and he said, you know, you really need to look at the Eastern spirituality.
Mm.
There's just a whole other way to look at these questions.
Yeah.
And at the time, it seemed very foreign to me. I didn't really understand what what a spirituality would look like without a personal God.
Mm.
I wasn't sure if there was I took a lot of comfort in the fact that I thought Jesus was a historical figure, and I wasn't sure if there were other historical figures. And anyway, it was not something that I was anxious to do, but I was very close to this guy. He was very smart. He said, "Really, you need to look at this." And I've been pretty blessed in my life. I haven't had a lot of misfortune, but I did hit kind of a rough spot when I was reading a book about Buddhism, and it was talking about suffering.
Mm.
And it just sort of turned the key for me. And when I was a Christian, and when people said, "Well, God has a plan, maybe you should pray more. I'm sure there's a reason for this. God's ways are not our ways. Jesus is with you. Jesus suffered even more than you did."
Yeah.
Um, None of that helped,
Mm.
and the whole idea of of suffering in Buddhism it's a pretty fundamental concept, and it's basically, look, everyone experiences pain. You experience suffering because of attachment and because you have expectations and assumptions, and things aren't going your way. And guess what, Cupcake? Things are not always going to go your way.
Mm.
And there was a practicality to it that really continues to help me. So I looked at there were three things that kind of got me unstuck. One was the mystics, and I really became convinced that in all traditions, and not just religious traditions,
Mm.
in all traditions, people had experiences that were really profound, and and that they had the same kind of experience, and it was not the experience you'd expect if you were raised like I was. There
Mm.
was no person, there was no three persons. You didn't get transported to heaven. You didn't see any separation between God and man. I tell people jokingly, when I was a Catholic, I thought I'd go to heaven. The popes are all on one side, the saints are all on the other side. Here's grandma. I don't believe that anymore.
Yeah.
And the point is that people that have experiences of ultimate reality, they call them mystical experiences, peak experiences, transcendent experience. How? Um, I'm in front of a waterfall, a work of art. I'm taking a hallucinogenic drug. I just had a seizure, a stroke. I'm in the middle of a near-death experience. Somehow, something dramatic happened to me, and in my terms, not original to me. The filters drop, and it's like looking at things through a different set of eyes, where you see a reality that's always there that you're just not aware of, and you don't know. Everything's on a granular basis. All of a sudden, this is all just a field of energy, and the energy goes right through you and me and everything around us. And everything is just fine. It always was, it always will be, because you're connected to that energy. You are the energy.
Mm.
And there's a sense of timelessness, there's a sense of serenity. And it's just striking how many times you'll see this across all traditions. And I'm talking to my wife, who was with me on the journey. She's much more intuitive than I am. She's much quicker than I am. She doesn't have to read all the books and do all the homework I do. And I'm telling her, these experiences are just magical. And a tear comes down her cheek, and she says, "I've had that experience.
Mm.
I never told anyone, never told you, didn't think it was spiritual because, again, it wasn't what I was taught to expect in church.
Yeah.
But it was very profound, transformative experience that's never left me."
Mm.
There's two things I recommend to people. One is a TED Talk by a, a neuroscientist named Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor,
Mm.
and she has a 20-minute TED Talk called "My Stroke of Insight," where she has a stroke and she recovers and she narrates what happened, and she basically had a peak experience. She
Mm.
doesn't say anything about God or religion or spirituality. She just says, "Man, I saw something that's always there that I never realized was there. Now, once I've seen it, I can't unsee it." And
Yeah.
the other is a classic that was written 40 or 50 years ago called The Tao, Tao of Physics. It's written by a physicist who said, there are striking parallels between Eastern mysticism and the new physics, quantum physics.
Mm.
Now, in the East, you don't have separation. In Buddhism, they talk about void, which is emptiness. And then they talk about form, and they say emptiness is form, form is emptiness. That's the Heart Sutra. In Hinduism, they talk about Brahman. There's one thing, fullness. Now, how is emptiness the same as fullness? There's no separation. You can call it whatever you want. Everything's sacred or nothing's sacred. God is, if you want to use the word God, and I don't use it anymore, God is a part of us, not apart from us. And in Taoism, there's a similar concept. There's the Tao, which is that oneness, and then there's the 10,000 things. It's emptiness and form all over again.
Mm.
And and so this idea that original sin, you can't be separated from ultimate reality. You are ultimate reality. Doesn't mean you created the universe, or it just means that everything's the same thing. If it's a thing, it's not a thing. If it's a thing, it's one thing. If it's a person, it's not a person. It's one person. It's oneness.
Yeah.
And there are people who have said to me, actually, I can't believe you spent 20 years and that's all you came up with. And I say, listen, it's all that I need. And
Mm.
I think back to when Trump was elected a few years ago, and I don't like to get political, but I can't help getting political. I'm writing a book about oneness, and here comes a guy, and he's going to ban Muslims, build walls, marginalize LGBTQ people, separate families, take away people's health care.
Yeah.
Look, if you have the kind of spirituality that I have, if you really believe in oneness, lack of separation, you don't do any of those things. If you
Mm.
wouldn't do it yourself, your family, your friend, you wouldn't do it to anybody. And it helps me to live a better life. It is a much, if I just keep in mind, hey, that we're living one life. I mean, you're in a different place, you answer to a different name, you occupy, a different time, but we're part of one life. We're fundamentally not so different. There's an idea in Buddhism about no self.
Mm.
Who are you? And in the East, there's a practice, self-inquiry. Who are you? Well, I'm a retired guy. Well, you weren't always that.
Mm.
Well, I'm a grandfather. Well, you weren't always that. Well, I'm a writer. Well, you certainly weren't always that. You only did that once.
Mhm.
Uh, okay, well, and you strip away the layers, and well, what am I? How is there an essential Larry Jordan that's different than an essential Sam Sellers? I don't see it anymore, and so I right now, I don't, I tell people I think self is a construct, myself is a function of my chemistry, my conditioning, my experience. I think soul is a fiction. I don't think there's any part of me that runs the show.
Mm.
Tom Waits says we're all monkeys with money and guns. It's,
Yeah.
it sounds funny, but it's pretty accurate when you think about it. How are you different than your dog? Well, I decided to get up in the morning. Well, apparently he did too. you know,
Yeah.
well, there's things that he like. There's things that you like and don't like. Well, he didn't you see him bat away his food. Well, you get angry with yourself, and other people will look at the dog.
Yeah.
It's just hard to say that there's really this bright line between human beings made in the image of God and everything and everyone else. And then, one thing that was really interesting to me was free will. The people that look at free will say, well, you really don't have as much free will as you think you have. And you can't be absolute about it. And you also can't just let go of the reins and live your life as if you have no will or agency. But, you know, um, again, your chemistry, your conditioning, your experience accounts for a lot.
Mm.
99% of the things going on in your head are subconscious. When they look at when did you decide to get a cup of coffee, well, there was a little flicker in your subconscious before you made a decision. Then
Mm.
you got a cup of coffee. Then you, according to the brain scientists, decided to get a cup of coffee 10 seconds after you got a cup of coffee. So maybe what you think is your pilot is really your engineer. He's not driving a train. He's just calling out the stations as
Yeah.
you go by. So I just have a very different perspective on things. But and here's something I tell people. I have awe, I have gratitude,
Mm.
I have reverence, I have a sense of responsibility. I'm just terribly grateful to be here now.
Mm.
And it's not personalized with me. Am I grateful to a supreme being? No, I'm just grateful. I'm
Yeah.
just grateful. And the way I explain it sometimes is I sort of think I use the term ultimate reality because it's neutral.
Mm.
And it is really what I'm looking for. I'm just interested in ultimate reality. I care about objective evidence and subjective experience, and I don't care about speculative theology. So I'm interested in ultimate reality. And so the concept of ultimate reality to me is more like the architecture of the universe than the architect of the universe.
Mm.
It's the connective tissue. And when I'm plugged in, when well, I'll give you a good example and then I'll take another short break for you. But um, I have a pretty eclectic spirituality now. I have a book club at Unity, which is a new thought movement. I speak at the Unitarian Universalists.
Mm.
I spend 2 months a year in a town where they have ashrams and Buddhist temples, and so I can in one week I can go to Catholic Mass and pray the Our Father, and
Mm.
then the next day I can go to the ashram and chant to the Divine Mother. Now, I don't say a creed anywhere I go because my spiritual practice is practice. It's not about belief.
Mm.
But if someone says, "Well, this is our practice," the way we conceive of ultimate reality, we pray the Our Father. I'll do it. The
Mm.
way we conceive of ultimate reality, we chant to the Divine Mother. I'll do it. Now, what does that involve? I go to this beautiful setting on the side of a mountain. Um, you know, not a cloud in the sky. The wind is blowing, the sun is shining, trees everywhere, and we sit in front of a fire. Now, I've been there sometimes when it's snowing, so you have this the sensuous, the fire is right at you, and you're also getting pelted by snowflakes. I mean, and so all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm just immersed in the sight and the sound and the smell and the touch. We recess and we go inside and we have a meal together, and then they sing and dance. Now I say they because I'm not a dancer, but I'm sitting on the floor. There are women in saris dancing around me, and I'm feeling the wind from the saris. And the whole tone of the ceremony is gratitude. You know, thank you for the sun. Thank you for the wind. Thank you for the mountain. Thank you for the trees. Thank you for the food. Thank you for the people. So
Mm.
when I talk about the architecture of the universe and plugging into the architecture of the universe, I'm talking about a real life experience that anybody can have where you experience the sight and smell and touch and sound of ultimate reality,
Yeah.
and you experience awe and gratitude and reverence. And
Mm.
so I'm not a cynical person. I'm not a nihilistic person. The way the book came about, my adult kids sat me down and said, "What happened to you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, you used to be this investment banker. You were conservative, you were transactional, you were driven. Now look at you. You're joyful. You cry more, you laugh more. You have more friends, deeper friendships. Whatever you're doing, more people should do."
Mm.
So, well, I stopped going to church. That's really what happened to me.
Yeah.
I just totally, and when you talked about, wasn't it a terrible place when your beliefs were gone? Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But can you get out of it? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
And people say, well, what beliefs do you embrace now? I don't believe anything. You
Yeah.
know, uh, do I what do why do I have to believe something? What do I have to believe? If you ask a Zen master, and this is I have a Zen practice. I know some Zen masters. I've not had this conversation, but this is how it would go. Is there a God? And this is very much Buddha's line. I don't know. Nobody knows. You don't really need to know. Okay. Well, what's the meaning of life? Do you realize that you're connected to everyone and everything?
Mm.
And then you say, well, where do I go when I die? I don't know. Are you here now?
Yeah.
And the point is that all those questions that I no longer had answers to, I realized they're not the most important questions in my life. Whether there's a God or whether I have some divine purpose that I'm supposed to discern, or whether I'm going to go somewhere after I die is not, it never affected the way I live my life. It still doesn't. But the sense of connection is tangible and
Yeah.
it does affect my way of life.
Yeah. You've mentioned your wife and your kids a few times, and I am wondering because I've talked to a lot of people who have done the whole deconstruction thing, and I'm wondering what it was like and the impact that it had on your relationships with family and friends and community, because for a lot of people, that comes with a an equal amount of loss as it does freedom. What was that like for you?
Yeah, great question and a very that is a common experience. Thankfully, my wife and I were on the same journey. She was, like I say, ahead of me. We talk to each other a lot and we converge in our thinking. Uh, there still are things where she and I are in slightly different places, but not on the big stuff. My kids actually helped me. And when they were young adults and I was still kind of a very authoritative father and very Catholic and very conservative, they challenged me because I was okay at the time with where the Catholic Church was in LGBTQ.
Mm.
And my kids said, what are you doing? What are you thinking?" And I could not explain myself. I just realized I kept stumbling around. I said, "Well, I think gay people are flamboyant." Did you say?
I mean, to
You
be
said,
fair, we are.
well, but their point was, do you know any straight people that are flamboyant? Is that like a hang up with you, flamboyancy? No, not normally. And
Yeah.
I said, well, I don't know, they're not always, monogamous. Do you know people that are straight that are not always monogamous? Well, yeah, a lot of them. Is that particularly a problem for you? I go, no. Well, what is your gay problem anyway? And the more that I said, the more stupid that it sounded, and the more when you're on the losing end of an argument and you realize it, and you just wish you could take back everything.
The mental gymnastics that you find that you have to start to play to be able to keep defending
Yeah,
your
and
argument.
yeah, and I just realized, this is really a losing battle. I'm just in the wrong, and I accepted what the church told me, like many other things, without questioning it, and I should have. So they were really helpful to me in that process, and I give them credit because, like I say, at the time they challenged me, and I wasn't really looking for a challenge, and I wasn't really happy about it, and I ended up looking pretty stupid, you once we got into that conversation. But I'm glad that we got there. Now, my parents are an interesting story. My parents are still Catholic, still conservative, and there was a lot of friction for a long time about my beliefs. And to the point, my dad said, I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about religion. And I sort of said, well, that's very superficial. I mean, that's what my friends and my family talk about. I mean, what are we going to do? Talk about the weather or talk about our health? I mean, I don't get that. But that's what you want to do. That's what we'll do. So I'm writing a book, and he says one day, "Hey, how's your book coming?" I said, "It's done." He said, "Well, you going to show it to me?" I said, "No, no, I didn't think you I'm not hiding anything, but I didn't think you were interested in it. You're not going to like it." And he
Mm.
goes, "Well, send it to me. I'm curious. I'd like to read it." So I sent it to him. And, somehow the conversations that you have on the spur of the moment where maybe you maybe you don't word things the way you want, maybe the other person doesn't, maybe all of a sudden it gets angry. When you have a book and the guy can read the book and he can say, I'm going to just put this down and think about it. Or, he mentioned this a few pages ago. I didn't really get what he was. Okay, now I see what he's saying.
Mm.
And so my dad read the book very closely and very constructively. And there are a few places, so I don't agree with you on this. I don't. But
Mm.
there are other places. He said, well, I think you'd make your point better if you did this, or caught a few typos. And then at the end of it, he said, now that I really understand your thinking, I have a lot more respect for you, and I feel a lot closer to you now that I read the book. So I thought that was a win. But unfortunately, it's if I say, yeah, the way to heal things with your family is to read 1,000 books and bake in a sweat lodge and write a book, that's a hard way. It's
Yeah.
a hard won battle, but there is hope. And I would say this, that my inquiry was so serious that it's difficult to dismiss me. If somebody says, well, I just don't think you really understand what Jesus was saying in the Gospel of Mark. I actually do understand that.
Mhm.
And and so people don't get very far when they try to evangelize me. And
Mhm.
another thing that's frustrating is somebody says, well, have you ever read Charles Spurgeon? I said, well, I've read a little bit. Well, you should read this. I said, I will read that. Now I
Mhm.
say, have you ever read the Tao Te Ching or the Bhagavad Gita? No. I said, well, you should read that. So the next time we meet, he says, did you read Charles Spurgeon? I said, yeah, I did. Did you read the Bhagavad Gita? No, I didn't.
Mhm.
I said, well, what the fuck are we going to talk about? Because
Mhm.
I'm not really interested in having a conversation that circles around your belief system.
Mhm.
I mean, I need parity here. I need to get to the same place I got with my friend. You might be right. You might be right. Now we can talk. If
Mhm.
this is a conversation about how you're right and I'm wrong, there's nothing to talk about.
Mhm.
There's just nothing to talk about. And I've had people tell me, well, one thing that we haven't talked about is that I did draw some inspiration from the person of Jesus. There's a story about the rich young man, and somebody says, what do I do to attain salvation? He says, well, follow the law. It sounds kind of Jewish. Yeah, I do that. I do that. Well, be a good person.
Mhm.
Yeah, sounds kind of Catholic. I do that. I do that. Okay, Jesus says, sell your stuff and follow me. And
Mhm.
that story haunted me. And I realized it was speaking to me that 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 I was at, in my 50s. My parents were still alive. My wife and I were still married. Our kids were launched. We were having grandchildren. Everybody's healthy. We have some financial security. What am I doing bond deals? Now, my wife had a slightly less problem because she works as a nurse, and she's bringing new babies into the world, and
Mhm.
I'm bringing new bond deals into the world. So, it's just like, yeah,
Slight
maybe
difference.
maybe there's something more here. And I would think, well, I don't know if I have enough to quit at 52 or whatever.
Mhm.
And there was this voice said, hey, you've been all over the world. I mean, the average person makes $2 a day, $5 a day. How much is enough for you?
Yeah.
And so we did quit our jobs and sell our house and spend our life in service. And that means, we've taught school in Africa and we help poor folks with their income tax, and we drive veterans to the VA, and we teach literacy classes, and we go on homeless counts. And I mean, we took the rich young man pretty seriously. And
Mhm.
that's another thing that, I don't really, if somebody says, well, are you a Christian? I say, well, first of all, I don't even know what that means. If you're asking me if I follow Jesus, yeah, Jesus said, quit your job and sell your stuff and follow me. And I did that.
Mhm.
Are you a Christian? And look, I'm not trying to suggest everybody's supposed to quit their job, but I'm trying to suggest that there's more than one way to follow Jesus. And if you think my way was the easy way, why don't you try it?
Yeah.
And you know, so there are people who meet me that say things like, "You're a better Christian than any Christian I know."
Mhm.
Now, I take it as a compliment because it was meant that way, but it's a backhanded compliment because they really should have said, you're one of the best people that I know.
Mhm.
Because there's not a one-to-one equivalence between being a good Christian and being a good person. And the way that it came at me kind of implied that there was.
Yeah.
Um, there's 8 billion people in the world, and there's 2 billion of them are Christian, and a whole bunch of those people, Christian or non-Christian, are good people.
Yeah.
So, but that's just a long-winded way of saying that the way I try to live my life and the way I ask my questions and the way I conduct myself, people are supposed to think there's something there that
Yeah.
that I should at least take seriously. This is not somebody I can dismiss or should dismiss. And he's respectful to me. He's certainly not dismissing me.
If you had to pick one of the most like potently powerful parts of your deconstruction, what comes to mind first?
It's hard for me to say because my process was sort of a slow roll.
Mm,
Um, I think there was a time when I just sort of realized, well, there's just not much standing, and that was a difficult realization. And the only way through is forward. And so if somebody is at the point where I was, where there's nothing standing, well, you've got to rebuild from here. Um, and it doesn't have to be a new religion or a new belief system or a new purpose. You just have to sort of realize, where am I, in my terms, where are you connected to the universe?
mm,
And I know people would say, well, I'm a musician. That's what brings me joy. Then you're supposed to make music. And I have a friend whose father-in-law passed, and he had been a veteran. He had been a business owner. He had raised a family. But his obituary was the best obituary I've ever read. It said, didn't mention any of those things. Said he played with children. He sang songs. He
mm,
grew flowers. He walked dogs. He loved life. That's what it's all about.
mm,
And so part of the one thing that's transformative that we haven't talked we've talked a little bit about the concept of no self, but just this idea of individuality and you know personal gain and personal responsibility and personal salvation. The approach I have now, it's like, no, it's not personal anything, it's universal. It's it's the connection to everyone and everything. And that's what it's all about. And so if I'm winning and someone else is losing, then I'm not winning.
One of my favorite questions to ask people, because so often we think that the church owns certain words and certain concepts, and spoiler, they don't. So I love to ask people this question to sort of reclaim language that might have been used against them in the past, which is present day, what brings you joy and peace?
Again, the really simple things. I have three young grandsons.
Mm.
Um, Two of them live very close to me. One of them lives a few hours away. They're at the stage where, they think their papa's pretty cool. And so there's nothing that brings me more joy than just
Yeah.
tickling and wrestling and telling jokes and stories and just spending time.
Mm.
We'll go have lunch, bring a hamburger up to my grandson and have lunch with him at school. And
Yeah.
that's really, what it's about.
Yeah. I love that. I love to finish these episodes with some encouragement for listeners, and particularly for people who are at the beginning of their journey, who have just pulled on that thread, who have just read a book, read an article, watched a podcast, listened to a podcast or something like that, and they're at the very beginning of their deconstruction. What would you say to them?
Well, I would really be encouraging, and I would warn someone that there is a little bit of turmoil if you're holding on to things.
Yeah.
Um, and but there is a way through it, and when you get to the other end, for me, I'm in a better place than I was. I
Yeah.
have much more joy in my life. I just care. I just feel like I care about the right things, and I don't care about the wrong things.
Mm.
And I don't beat myself up. Somebody says, "Well, do you regret doing those bond deals and making that money?" I don't regret. Do you regret spending time in the Catholic Church? If I had to do over again, I wouldn't do it. But do I regret it? That's a hard thing to say. I mean, so I wouldn't beat yourself up. And I think we all live in a little bit of a silo. We know that we're in the same neighborhood, we go to the same schools, the same churches, the same stores. Everybody thinks like us and acts like us and talks like us. And religion is a silo of its own. And a lot of people think that their version of Christianity is that's just the way all Christians are. It's not.
Mm.
That Christianity is just like all religions are. It's not. Um, so, the real key to this is just to keep an open mind and an open heart, and to just say, I'm going to follow truth wherever it leads. Now, if that's not your thing, then if you go looking for truth, it's going to upset you.
Yeah.
So it's not universal advice, but if I would say that sort of is a sift right there. You say to somebody, are you looking for comfort or are you looking for clarity? And
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we believe are comfortable.
Mm.
There's a God that loves me. He set up laws. If bad people get punished, good people get rewarded. I'm going to live forever after I die. Those are all very comforting beliefs.
Mm.
And some of them might be true, but maybe not. And what I say to people is, well, think about a world where there is no God, where there are no rules, where there is no justice. How terrible would that world be to live in? And if they say it would be terrible, I say, well, how different would it be than this world?
Mm.
Be the same as this world.
Yeah.
There's nothing about this world that says, oh, God's in control,
Mm.
everything's fair, the rules are clear, I know
Yeah.
where I'm going. No, no.
Yeah.
So Christianity did a big disservice to us all, I think,
Mm.
by giving us the false sense of security that they had all the answers.
Mm.
And one thing I said the other day that I wish I would have said sooner is I went to church for 50 years. There is no mystery in church. But
Mm.
somebody read my book said, well, now that I've read your book, I realize there's really not like some kind of answer man to go to get answers to all these really important questions. No, there's not. There's
Yeah.
not, And so you have to live with a little bit of ambiguity and uncertainty and insecurity
Mm.
and and at the end of the day say, well, I guess I've always lived with this. I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
That's the point. That's the point.
Yeah. And to mention your book, like I said, I read it prior to this interview, and I will pop it in the show notes for people to be able to access it because it is deeply insightful and informative and interesting without, I've read some books that have a tone of beratement and disrespect, and I don't love that. And so this, your book does not have that. So I recommend it to people to be able to even just ask the questions about things that their current answer is, I don't know, and to be able to, like you said, sit with it, feel how you feel about the words that are on the page, and ask questions about those words just as much as any other words that you read on a page. And so thank you for putting the book into the world. It's wonderful. And
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you read it. Yeah.
I will be sure to
It,
pop that in the show notes for people to be able to access it as
it's
easily.
pretty user friendly. It's got short paragraphs and short chapters. There's
Mm.
a reading, suggested reading with, annotated bibliography
Yeah.
and also study questions. And it's really intended for somebody to say, oh, no, there's something, I'd like to know a little more about. It's a very broad overview. And
Yeah.
like you say, it's not prescriptive and it's certainly not angry.
Yeah.
I spent so much time I spent a lot of time on the content of the book. I probably spent just as much time on the tone of the book,
Mm.
because I really didn't want an angry book.
Yeah.
I didn't. There's a fine line between this guy knows what he's talking about and this guy sounds like a know-it-all. And
Yeah.
how do you project authority and humility at the same time? And it's really difficult to do. And I feel pretty good about the book. I feel very good about the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me. I've loved this conversation. I love when
Yeah.
talking about, things that simultaneously make no sense and complete sense at the same time. They're my favorite topics of conversation. So um,
Yeah.
it has been a pleasure to chat with you. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you. It's been delightful. I really, really enjoyed visiting with you. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.